Hello, everyone. Florinda Bryant here with Austin Community College's Makers and Methods, and we're very fortunate today to have Taji Senior here. And we started talking, and the camera wasn't rolling, but we were actually really beautiful conversation talking about higher education and how to, how that all works. So if you don't mind just continuing to share some of the things you're talking about.
Yeah, so when I graduated, I'm the first person in my family to go straight from high school to undergrad. Like, I'm the first traditional college student in my family. My mom has a degree, my grandfather has a degree, but my mom got hers after serving in the military, and then my grandfather got his in the early 80s. So I was the first person to go and then finish. And so I just didn't know a lot. I didn't have a lot of personal points of reference. I didn't even know the questions to ask. And I took some classes in community college. Like, I had to take a math class because I was not a great math student. So I had to take a math class. And then I did some AP stuff. So I got rid of my English credit by the time I started undergrad because of AP courses. But the thing that I wish, and I just this last week finished up my MFA coursework at UCLA.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But the thing that I wish that I understood, I'm very proud of the education that I received, but I wish that I wish community college was more destigmatized, and I wish that I knew more of just about value and about, like, you get to these big institutions that have these big names, and that's great, and that may carry you, but the work that they're doing there a lot of times is not that astronomically different or better. Like, I just being 110% real with you, like, a sort of grief that I feel graduating at this time, or like a sort of grief that I carried through we put such a high, status on these places. And don't get me wrong, there is incredible work being done at UCLA. There are incredible people there. I did have just top of the line, skillful, knowledgeable instructors, but there was just also a lot of people like who did not get there through their own merits. Like, it's not all a meritocracy. So I think if you can figure out a way, and I also graduated undergrad with a lot of debt, and that was really hard to be saddled with as a 23-year-old. And I think if I just had more information about, like, even just getting some of those basics out of the way at community college, I would have maybe taken advantage of that a little bit more.
Yeah, I was really, the drum department at ACC has been around for, 30 years. And I too, I started out at a community college because it was accessible to me. I was, a young performer. I was still, in junior high and high school, but it was something that was, at the time, I thought I was like, oh, this is just normal. This is fine. But there is a stigma about it. There is this like, oh, it's just, and the work that's especially being done now between UT and ACC and HT, and everyone's being super intentional about letting go of these older traditional higher education models. And it's happening in theater. So of course it's like, let's just, deconstruct and reconstruct the whole thing. I was super excited that you were able to hang out with me today, because I I feel like and this was back, Taji and I did some time together at Salvage Vanguard Theater. And that experience for me was, beautiful and heartbreaking. I went through a complete mental breakdown of lack of support. And just, I think it was a really hard time to be an artist, particularly, a lot of people earmark George Floyd as this turning point. But from my experience, I ain't been right since Ferguson.
Right.
Since, Michael Brown. And so the question of like the privilege of being an artist and the privilege of like doing your art beyond race, you were someone who would really resonate. And also like, it made me feel like, it's like, oh, it's a generational thing, girl, you're getting older. But it's a beautiful freedom just to, the idea of being an artist, but not having to be a Black artist, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or how that intersects with your work. Do you mind talking to me a little bit about your thoughts about that? Like, the privilege of being an artist. Are we artists or are we Black artists?
Oh my God, that's the question of my life. That's such a good question. I mean, there is an insecurity and doubt that I have sometimes of like, if I weren't Black, would I have as much to say? Because my Blackness, my womanness is the central focus of a lot of a lot of the work that I make, not necessarily a lot of the work that I'm invited to participate in. I'll say that I do, and that's the privilege. The privilege is that I'm not beholden. I only have to do this sort of work. I make work that I'm interested in, that I'm curious about, that I just sort of can't stop, playing over in my mind. And so, for you, Ferguson was your like big turning point. And it's so interesting because I think if you talk to people on an individual level, we all have that, like, this is the thing that like radicalized me, or this is the thing that broke me. And for me, it's Khalif Browder. I don't, that story, it's Khalif Browder and Dan Roy Henry. Those two stories in particular, like, I really sort of like, I felt something shift in me with when I learned of those two young men and their stories. So the privilege is the ability to do things that isn't just Black art, but I do wonder about like, what is the role of the artist? I did feel that sort of, pressure this summer, just sort of watching everything explode. Because what was mind-boggling to me about George Floyd in particular was like, we supposed to be in the house. It's a pandemic. How are y'all managing to like carry on with like state-sanctioned Black violence as usual in the middle of a global pandemic? Like, that was like wild to me. And I think about the role of the artist a lot in these movements. I do think you have a responsibility. I think it's, if you are not reflecting back to the world what's happening in it, if you're not asking questions, if you're not poking and prodding, I do think it is like boring and flat and self-aggrandizing. And that's not to say that every piece of work you need to make needs to be like resistance or something like that, but it does need to be in conversation with the world at large. Even if it's just about like, what is my place in the world at large? And I do think some of the best work does that. And speaking of Salvage Vanguard, I'd done this piece a few years ago that was in development with SVT. And I wasn't ever really pleased with it. And I sort of moved away from it. But then this summer happened and I was like, I'm not out on the streets. I was in Amarillo where my family is. Like, I'm sort of secluded from like the city and where things are like big, demonstrations are happening, but I have to do something. I cannot be a Black person that has accrued all of this social currency that has allowed me to have these opportunities and do nothing. And so I called SVT and was like, I have this piece. I don't really like it, but I'm willing to work on it. Could we live stream it and then raise money for different organizations? And Kate was game. And it became this whole other thing, and we were able to raise money, and I do feel really good about that. But I think that the incredible Ebony Stewart, you know, underscored for me, and that I'm still working on, like, as a Black artist, and I'm sure you feel this way too, as a Black theater maker. As a Black theater maker, that means you're probably going to be inhabiting a lot of predominantly white spaces. And then it's like, it's great to have the financial, structural, and institutional support of these spaces, but what does that mean if your work is not accessible to the people whose experiences you are reflecting? You know, what if you don't have your auntie and them who aren't like well versed in theater etiquette, whatever that's supposed to mean. Like, you know, what if you don't have those folks? If they aren't present, then it's like, well, then who is the work reverberating off of?
Right.
And what is my responsibility as an artist to make sure that those folks, and that how I'm talking about these things, you know, is reaching the folks that I'm hoping that it reaches, you know? Yeah, so that's kind of my thought of like what it means to be a Black artist.
Yeah, no, yes, all of the things. You said Ebony Stewart, yes. I want to just make sure people write that down.
Write it down. She's incredible.
Kate Taylor at Salvage Vanguard Theater, SVT. You know, I include writers in my contracts where I bring my own marketing person with me. They have to. And then that way, my people, because it gets complicated, right? Like, it's like we want to have more Black and brown people in theater spaces, but we don't want to have the responsibility of making those spaces safe for those Black and brown people, because we get, like, it's, you know, inviting somebody, come hang out with me at somebody else's house. It gets complicated really quickly. And then how to not let those institutions then keep your guest list, keep your contact information, and then pretend, you know, that they have done the work.
And only market to those folks when they're doing Black and brown work.
Absolutely, you know, and you know, here in Austin, I feel like, you know, that's really problematic. Do you think that's a problem? Because you know, you've been, you know, your show's gone to New York, you're in LA. Is that a thing that's just Austin, South specific, or does it happen?
I think it's endemic to the whole institution of theater. I think it's this thing of like, okay, I'm gonna say this, and hopefully I say it with enough context that it makes sense. I think in this current climate of conversation around race and around ethnicity and culture and that sort of thing, there tends to be this thing of like, if somebody finds it offensive, we just are going to do away with it completely. And something should be done away with completely. Some people we should never hear from ever again. Some people have like crossed the line. We don't need their work. We don't need them. We don't need any of their contributions. But other things, like when you get rid of them, you lose the opportunity to have a nuanced dialogue around it. Right. And so many folks are like, I guess understandably, are solution-based and solution-focused, and there's not a lot of attention paid to how we get to the solution. And so if you want more Black and brown folks in theaters, if you want people of different class structures in theater, if you really care about this living, breathing thing of theater, then you need to look at these people as human beings. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like human beings who love stories and trust that your audience is smart enough to find themselves in the stories that you are telling. So one, there has to be an examination of like, why this story, why now? You know what I mean? It can't just be like, oh, this is scintillating or sensationalized or in vogue or trendy. That's a disservice. People are not dumb. They know when you're only reaching out to them when you are putting on a show by a Black artist. Also, I just think that there needs to be an investment in, and this is the thing that I want to get better about, like you talked about including your writer, I want to get better about like having Black technical teams or having technical teams of color. Like folks are starting to get better about having creative teams of color, but like, what does that mean to have Black lighting and sound and tech and TD and all of those other folks? And I think institutions, if you truly care about, arcing towards diversity and inclusion, what I felt like I didn't see enough theaters do is like, okay, you can't make shows right now. Okay, great. We can't be in person. Could you not have online training programs where you go out into communities of color and you find folks of color and say, hey, are you interested in theater? You think you want to do lighting design? Well, we can have a free masterclass with you with our person who we always work with, and instead of paying that artist what you would pay them to mount a show, you can pay them to teach. You can have these training programs that are free and accessible or low cost. Have your, all of those grants that you are writing, have your benefactors underwrite programs that train people to be participatory and not just spectators when it's convenient for you.
Yes. I feel like it's the thing where it's like, it feels like it's like so focused on the product, not the process. So focused on the solution, not the process. Everybody wants to get to the ta-da of a moment and not figure out how to do the work. Which leads like some very flat living and some flat art being made. And all of the things. So I do want to ask you, because I asked the people, when did you, because I want to shift a little bit, love and hip hop in here, but when did you first fall in love, like with theater, like with performance? Like, do you know? Do you remember?
That's such a good question. That's a question that I don't get asked that I really love. My mom, born and raised in Philly, Northeasterner. I bounced back and forth between her and my paternal grandparents as a kid. And my mom is like she's not a performer, but she's really good at drawing. She just is like, the making of things is like really intuitive to her. And she's patient. She's really, really patient. She has a patience that I do not have in terms of like learning that kind of skill. But she's like really good at drawing. She's always interested in like color and movement and that sort of thing. And as a single mom, we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia. She was a college student. She was trying to whatever. So she would try to like expose me to as much as she could. And when I was 10, she took me to see this production of Fame. And we of course had nosebleeds and very cheap. I probably could tell you how much it cost because I still have the ticket stub.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was a whole event, right? Because so in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia, if anybody's familiar, there's a strip called 52nd Street. And I don't know if it exists in the same way, but like how it was when I was a kid is like you would walk down the street and there was like all kinds of street vendors, right? And they would sell you Muslim oils and they would sell you this and they would sell you whatever. And so my mom bought me a matching hat and scarf set for $10 that was red and it had teddy bears on it. And I had a red beret with teddy bears on it. And she had bought me a coat from the thrift store that was really nice, this pea coat that was blue with red trim. And I threw all of that on and got dressed and we went to go see Fame. And it was a whole event. And there was a woman drummer. And I was like, yeah. And just sort of the like spectacle of it all. And I think the way her kit was set up is that she was playing and the stage somehow moved her forward. Like she started off in the back and the stage somehow moved her forward. And it was so big and so grandiose. And I just thought that was incredible. And the other sort of pivotal moment that happened around the same time was Introducing Dorothy Dandridge came out. And I somehow saw it in that I've got rhythm and that song, like, God bless anybody who was in a 50-foot radius of me because I could not stop singing it. I just like the spectacle, the beauty, I just thought it was so incredible. And that's when I sort of was like, came alive.
I love asking people that question, the look in people's eyes, the joy that like takes over people's faces is amazing. Yeah, I'm glad that we got to talk about that today. And when it gets hard, I hope you just go look at that ticket.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Remember the joy and the whole thing. So when it comes to your process, when it comes to how you go about getting the work, where you find your inspiration or how you do your digging, can you share a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, I think when I first started making work, it's because of Adrienne Dawes, really and truthfully. I had worked on a project with her, and Dawes was like, when you make your own show, and I had no intention of like ever making my own show. But then Dawes told SVT that I was making my own show. And then SVT called and said, do you need support? And I was like, well, I guess I'm making the show. And my process used to be this like really sort of black and white, fact-based. I my undergraduate degree is in journalism. So it's like this really sort of like journalistic rigor. Like if it can't be proven, then it can't be said, then it can't be, you have to tell the truth as best as you know it. And if you can't reasonably say that that's the truth, then you can't put it up. And that was really limiting. Yeah. And something happened. This is a credit I will give to grad school, is that I kind of shifted from being, as it relates to art, like from a thinking person to a feeling person. Mm-hmm. And so just sort of like being more receptive, and it all just becomes about like input equals output. And it's one of those things of like, you see something, you just take note of it. And I don't know when I see a thing that like it's gonna become something later on. It just is like, if I'm drawn to it, I've gotten better about being like, oh, you're attracted to this. And you don't have to intellectualize why you're attracted to it. You can just know that you're attracted to it and let that live in you. And so specifically with this, I should also say that like, Black women in all varying forms will always be a massive source of inspiration to me, not just on some high horse of like Black woman, almighty goddess, da da da. Like that's true too. But I would go crazy if it weren't for other Black women. The world, I would not be able to make sense of the world. I would not be able to make sense of myself if it weren't for like Black women being honest about who they are. And that goes from everyone from like you, Florinda, to June Jordan, to Lucille Clifton, to Adrienne Dawes, to, my Black women instructors. Like I don't have language. I don't have a way forward. I don't have again, an understanding of myself or the world, if not for Black women. So I'm always kind of looking to Black women to be like, what does this mean? What do we think about this? How am I supposed to interpret this? What's the, so I find, going to Black women writers, Black women visual artists, Kara Walker for the past year or two has been massive to me. Black scholars like Saidiya Hartman and Dorothy Roberts have been really massive to me. Black women like Lisa B. Thompson have really been massive to me. So that's always sort of like, almost always any sort of question I have, I sort of like go to Black women to sort of understand it. And then I'm like, what have they already said about it? And how can I be in, the question always is, how can I be in conversation with them? Mm-hmm. Like, how can I be in conversation with June Jordan, which is an audacious thing to say, I should say. Like, that's a really like the nerve. The nerve of you to want to be in conversation with June Jordan.
I think she loves that. I think that's the point.
Yeah, but it's like that's always the goal in the work or that's always the measure. That's always the measure. What is Tyler English Beckwith gonna think about this? Is this gonna ring true to Florinda Bryant? Is Adrienne Dawes gonna see like is she gonna be able to track the structure? Is Adrienne gonna look at this and be like, this play didn't tell me how to digest it? That's always the measure. It's always Black women.
Right. Oh my goodness, 30 minutes flies when you are good. I thank you so much for joining me today. And it's so good to see you. I love this thing. We feed each other. This is a great time of deconstruction and reconstruction, and I'm so glad to know that you are also in the world continuing to find your art, do your art. And I can't wait to hear what you're doing next. Do you have any ideas? Like, what's up? What's coming up?
Oh my God, I don't know. I literally I presented my thesis last week, and now I'm just looking for jobs. I had a piece a few years ago called Devour, and I am sort of redeveloping that. I've been thinking so much about Desiree Washington and that 90s Mike Tyson rape trial.
Yeah.
And so I'll just say that I've been thinking a lot about her, a lot about her. And I am curious to know what the collective would think about her experience under this 2021 lens.
Yeah. It's so funny when people make a lap and you be like, wait, didn't we get amnesia? We get amnesia so quick, and then don't forget nothing in other regards. So thank you for saying her name. I'm excited. Happy hunting is that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank y'all for tuning in, and join us next time for another episode of Makers and Methods. Peace and blessings, y'all.
Thank you.